Okay, I prepped all the areas for welding. As I said before, I cut off that little flange and I welded it back on so that the mating surface of the inner wheelhouse, which is back in this area here, will make contact. I did drill all my holes. Picked up about 1.5 inch pattern all the way around. Drilled the holes. These are the front holes here that'll end up here on these two areas. Sorry, a little crooked. The only other thing I did was I put some more rust treatment inside that rocker. This is really the last chance to get in there and do something about it. So I put some more in there, and a couple other spots. There's some up here where this was bare metal and had rusted. Another thing I wanted to point out, this seat back, I did not separate that. It was already separated. So when I put this back in, I'll weld it on the inside back here. But it's stuff like that where the spot welds are just kind of iffy. So no big deal. I'll put it back together and get it solid. And there's the finished wheelhouse. Turned out pretty good. There's a tiny bit of a gap right there, but that'll be corrected with a little bit of seam sealer. You know, you're not going to have perfect gaps everywhere. I did weld up that inner brace, and show you the underside here. There's all those welds on the frame or adjacent to the frame, and you can see where I burned through. It's good penetration from those other welds. Welded in at the rocker, so that's all in place. And I welded these up here at the top. All in all, it fits pretty good. The only bad spot that I would say at all is right here at this front corner. And you know, again, these things are aftermarket parts, and I showed you before how conflicted some of this stuff is. Even from the factory, when they were new, things didn't fit well. So what I'll do is I'll go underneath there later on when I'm working on the undercoat and the sealants, and I'll dolly the edges together. Kind of hard to show you, can't get my hand in there, but I'll work the floor pan back towards the wheelhouse some and work the two together, and the gap will be a lot smaller. And again, I'll fill it with seam sealer. That'll take care of that. And there's the rest of the welds up on top for that seat support. The only other thing that I will recommend you pay attention to, and you can look over here and see, there's this little brace that mounts to the inner wheelhouse, and I know it has something to do with the seat or some panels. I think it's a trim panel, actually. Whenever you cut this apart, make sure you salvage that piece, and you can see here it's right there. So I will relocate that so that the trim panel will be back in its proper spot and secure. Other than that, the wheelhouse is done, and I'm going to go on and do the other side. And at this point, some people would probably put the quarter panel on. I'd say don't do that, because you need to be able to make some adjustments, especially with the tail panel and everything else. So I'll leave that alone until I get the other side together, and then I'll start mocking up both quarter panels together along with the tail panel. That way you don't run into a conflict. If you got one welded solid, there's no adjustments. So pay attention. We'll move on to the next step. And one final look before I move on. As I showed earlier, I had the left wheelhouse welded in, and it's basically the same process for the right wheelhouse, you know, just inverted. So right wheelhouse is in place. As you can see, the primer's still wet there, and it's a little cold out, so it's going to take a little while to dry up. But it's all in place and ready to go. And same issue on a little bit of a gap down there, but that's not a big deal. So now that I have the wheelhouses in place, as you can see, I've got a quarter panel I'm working on there, and I have the other quarter panel partially prepped. And of course, I'll move on to that and show you that process next.